Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ian Brew podcast. I'm a big basketball fan. I absolutely love following NBA basketball. I like to watch all the teams and all the players. I don't necessarily have a favorite team, but there are definitely different players and the way they play, styles of play that are especially interesting to watch, to keep up with, and so I really enjoy it. We're coming right into the home stretch now. They're trying to figure out where they rank as they go into the playoffs. And so anyway, really good basketball, a lot of fun with that. A little bit annoying that some of the teams are tanking so that they can get a better draft pick, but all of that is neither here nor there. There have been a couple of things though over the last month here, the month of March, that really are worthy of some comment and exploration. One of them just happened on Monday, and so there was a player named Jaden Ivey who went onto Instagram and he made some videos. And among the things that he said on those videos he made statements that called into question the NBA's position of backing the an LGBTQ stance, specifically having a Pride Month so that they could celebrate LGBTQ plus individuals or fans or whatever. I don't know that it's really clear what exactly they're doing with all of that, but they're promoting that thing, and he specifically said that they are promoting unrighteousness, and he didn't think that they should be doing that. Which, of course, that's a pretty bold statement to say something like that. There was a firestorm after him saying that, and then his team, the Bulls, they ended up releasing him so essentially, firing him from the team. So of course, then there's a firestorm. Wait, you can't speak up and then say something that they disagree with, and then they can fire you. Specifically, the team said that it was for behavior that was detrimental to the team. But of course, that's a really broad kind of catch-all. What exactly does that mean? Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. And so, but that was the second of the two events that kind of has brought this about. The first was in February, at the end of February. The Atlanta Hawks announced a collaboration that they were going to do with a local business. And the local business is a place called Magic City, which happens to be a strip club. Now, the argument, of course, is that they do other things other than just have scantily clad or unclad women dancing in there. They make good chicken wings, apparently. But they promoted it as a collaboration with a cultural icon and one of the places that helps make the city of Atlanta unique and offers some of its unique cultural experiences for people there. And so they were going to do a collaboration for an entire evening where they promoted this particular business. They were going to have their like some sweatshirts and other things that had the name of this business on being publicized there in the arena. And then interestingly, just kind of out of the blue, a player from another team, he is the backup center at San Antonio, a guy named Luke Cornett, wrote a blog post where he said, "Hey, I'm not sure that this is a good idea." And of course, that also sparked a firestorm and all kinds of discussion around that. And so it's been really interesting to see those two events and kind of what's happened in the world of basketball as it relates to that. It ends up bringing us to a place where there's some discourse about morality surrounding the game of basketball in particular, of course, in this corporate setting of basketball at professional level, but it also speaks to the way that these questions around morality actually come into our day-to-day life and are often put in front of us, and especially for believers, are put in a position where they essentially must assent to it, or they're not allowed to speak out against it. And if they do, they're met with some sort of resistance. And so I wanted to kind of explore those ideas in particular. So first, I wanted to talk about the issue here with the Hawks. And well, here's what's interesting. This isn't a completely new phenomena. After all, if you may remember, back in 2020, there was the whole Black Lives Matter thing was going on, and the NBA, when they had returned from their shutdown, they were playing inside the bubble. Among the things that they did was had all of the players wear Black Lives Matters t-shirts, and then most of the players were actually kneeling for the national anthem as those things started. And one player in particular, a guy named Jonathan Isaacs on the Orlando Magic, wouldn't wear the shirt. So I mean, he didn't even warm up with the shirt. He had on his pants, but didn't have on the Black Lives Matter T-shirt. And then he stood during the national anthem, and it was actually interesting to see just kind of the stark contrast of all of the others in protest, and then one not in protest, but clearly actually the one being protesting what was going on. He, of course, cited specifically his faith for doing that. One, the belief that the things that Black Lives Matter in particular was standing for were not things that were consistent with who he was and his faith. And he had already been a pretty vocal proponent of his Christian faith and wanting to live in a way that it was consistent with the teaching of the Bible. And so this isn't completely uncharted territory, and yet we've just found ourselves in this situation once again in a relatively short period of time. So I wanted to look first at the issue with the Hawks. And so this is actually, interestingly enough, it's still up on NBA.com, but this is the announcement. It's the Hawks to celebrate Atlanta's iconic cultural institution, Magic City, during the team's Magic City Monday in the game against the Orlando Magic on Monday, March 16th. And so down in the article, we read that they announced today a special one-night collaboration to celebrate the city's iconic cultural institution during the team's home game against Orlando. And so then it just kind of talks about how it's this theme. The collaboration of this theme night is very meaningful after all the work that we've put together to promote this business. It's an iconic Atlanta institution that's made an incredible impact on our city and its unique culture. And so, again, this is what is in the press release specifically from the NBA as it related to that. But it was interesting because then, kind of out of left field, just a few weeks later, we read on Luke Cornett's blog, which generally doesn't have a ton of traffic, but interestingly enough, got a lot of traffic because of this, mostly after the fact, but got a lot of traffic. But here's what he wrote. He wrote, "This week, the Atlanta Hawks announced a special one-night collaboration to celebrate the city's iconic cultural institution, Magic City, during the team's home game against Orlando on Monday, March 16th. In its press release, the Hawks failed to acknowledge that this place is, as the business itself boasts, Atlanta's premier strip club." And I think that it wasn't by accident that the Hawks didn't write that down. But given this fact, here's what he writes. "Given this fact, I would like to respectfully ask that the Atlanta Hawks cancel this promotional night with Magic City." So now, after he's a good player, but a backup center on a team that is not even related in any way to this promotion. But he thought that the issue was significant enough that he actually ought to stand up and say something about it. He says that the NBA should desire to protect and esteem women, many of whom work very diligently every day to make this the best basketball league in the world. So again, he wants to point that out. I think, but my favorite statement that he says is this one. He says, we should promote an atmosphere that is protective and respectful of the daughters, wives, sisters, mothers, and partners that we know and love. And really, I mean, there can't really be any clearer point than that. Now, he's obviously giving a moral argument specifically for this and pointing out that that a place like Magic City, that calls itself Atlanta's premier strip club, is of course in the business of exploiting women. It doesn't matter how those women got there, or even if they voluntarily decided to go and be a part of it. The fact is that the business by its very nature is exploitative. And so celebrating that is hardly seems like a good idea. What's even more interesting to me, I think, is thinking about what was going on inside the decision-making apparatus of the Atlanta Hawks in deciding to do this. I mean, after all, it's not like the Atlanta Hawks organization isn't a multi-billion-dollar business. I mean, it's valued at somewhere in the $4 to $6 billion range. So it's not like this is just some corner store deciding that they want to promote the local strip club. In fact, like, this is a big business with lots of influence, and you would assume lots of really smart people associated with it. And yet somehow this group of people looked at this situation and decided, what would be a really good idea? Let's partner with the local business that's exploiting women down the street, and let's promote it as something that really contributes to what makes it uniquely Atlanta. And I don't know, that just really points to what a sad state of affairs it is. Now, I'm not unaware that many cities have a reputation for being the kinds of places where bad behavior is allowed. I went to seminary in New Orleans, and so New Orleans definitely has some of that. New Orleans during Mardi Gras, is definitely not the kind of place that you want to be. The stuff that goes on Bourbon Street on a regular basis isn't really the kind of stuff that we ought to be promoting. The term for Las Vegas is Sin City. So I'm not unaware of the fact that some cities want to embrace the idea that, hey, these things are part of our distinct culture. And yet at the same time, I don't think that's really what we ought to do. I mean, after all, the city of Sodom in the Old Testament, I mean, it's been memorialized as a place where sin happens, so much so that that the term sodomy is something that's still part of our vernacular. So, that points to an event many thousands of years back in the past. And yet again, I wouldn't want, for 2,000 years from now, for the word Atlanta to be able to be made into a verb as it describes the exploitation of women. So again, I think that the fact that this business, that all of the people in this business got together, didn't come to a conclusion that maybe this isn't the best idea. In fact, they went ahead and they promoted it. They sent it on through the NBA, who also gives them a press release, and so that's where they're going. Now, of course, the response to him saying that was pretty swift. A lot of people were like, well, who are you? What are you having to say about all of this stuff? Like, you can't force your morality or your views or your ideas on us. The Atlanta Hawks, for their part, made no plans to change the what they had planned to cancel the event. There were actually some NBA like pundits and stuff, like they came out and they were like, hey, who are you? I mean, you're just the backup center for some other team. Like, you don't really have any clout. I heard one say something to the effect of, it'd be different if somebody who was a bigger player said something, but the fact that Luke Cornett's saying it, doesn't mean a whole lot. There's an article here that I read as well that about a particular NBA pundit named Michelle Beadle, who I don't know who she's working for. She used to work at ESPN, but I don't know if she still works for them. But again, she's big on all the basketball stuff. But here's what she actually said. She said, Luke Cornett, I need you to take a seat. And in all respect to he wrote a long blog about why it should respectfully rescind Magic Monday. She says, as a woman, I am not offended by the idea of Magic Monday. Again, I cannot say this enough. Magic City, for anyone who's been to Atlanta, is not just a strip club. She doesn't say it just like that. And I feel that's the sort of vibes that maybe people are getting. Well, the reason that they get those vibes is because that's what they say. So, but anyway, but then she goes on. And secondly, and more importantly, is thank you, white knight. We don't need this. And I've had enough of men telling us what we can and shouldn't, and what we should want, and what we should need, and how we should act. No. These are not trafficked 12-year-olds, okay? We have that, and none of those people are being brought forward. This is not that. These are grown women who have a job. Again, it's really funny to hear somebody giving this argument. Just because grown people make the decision to engage in exploitative behavior, even at their own expense, like they themselves being exploited, doesn't mean that the behavior is right behavior. And so just that argument is dumb. The other thing is it's like, wait, here you actually have like telling him, oh, white knight. Whether he's white or black or any other color doesn't really matter. Here's a man who's actually standing up and saying, you know what? We ought to honor and respect the women in our care. We ought to honor and respect the women who are in our lives. The people, and not even just the women in our lives, women all around the world. Like, this guy is making a statement that women are to be valued. And the response from a woman is, well, we don't need that. We'd rather be exploited, is essentially what she's saying. And I just think that that's absolutely ridiculous and totally misses the mark. Here's the cool thing. After the uproar, the NBA ended up getting pressure. And so the NBA ended up going to the Hawks and having the Hawks then cancel it. So the Hawks didn't do that of their own volition, but rather the NBA said, hey, essentially the press for this is so bad that we need you guys to cancel it. Again, it was only after there was backlash. They clearly didn't have an issue with it initially. I mean, after all, the press release is still up on the NBA's website. And yet they had sufficient pressure that they decided that they needed to back off of that. And so in that, I say kudos to Luke Cornett and then to other people who then, on recognizing that, went ahead and did that. I used to live in Atlanta. We used to go to the basketball games there all the time. And again, I love basketball. I love live sports. But if I were a season ticket holder and I were going to that game, I would be appalled. I am a dad of 4 daughters. And for me to take my wife and my 4 daughters to a game where they're promoting the local strip club, when obviously the strip, it's an exploitative business. If obviously that's the kind of thing that's really ought to be unacceptable to any man who thinks well of women. Well, then, why would a business do that? I don't understand. And yet there is a sense of condemnation, you can say, against our cultural in general, that there could be a situation where a multi-billion-dollar business would make the decision to promote a collaboration with that sort of industry. It's completely crazy to me. And so I'm happy with the way that particular thing worked out, and I certainly hope that that other organizations, basketball and otherwise, also make that decision not to jump into collaborations with businesses that are engaged in immoral practices. Like let's not do that. And so anyway, but that brings us to the situation with Jaden Ivey. And again, Jaden Ivey is he's a basketball player. He was drafted, I believe, in 2022. He's been on the Detroit Pistons, and then just recently was traded over to the Bulls. He's had a hard season this year. Hasn't done as well as he would have liked. He's at the end of a contract, and so it's interesting. The reality is that he got traded, and the whole idea behind the trade, just for somebody who is who's a fan, I understand a little bit of the way they do trades. So they traded for him, recognizing that he wasn't a particularly valuable asset, and that because his contract was expiring, they wouldn't be obliged to pay him into the next year, and so he would be off their books, and then they would have money to be able to go and sign another player. So they essentially traded for him so that they would have his expiring contract. The reality is that them making a decision to release him today versus going for another couple of weeks really is incidental. The reality is that he was not going to be with the team next year anyway, and so this is something that they could have naturally done. I believe that they actually made the decision to release him at this time as an opportunity to basically virtue signal to the people out there that, like, no, we care about the moral issues of the day. So I do think that there was definitely a sense of virtue signaling that happened with all of this. However, let's kind of look back at specifically the statements that he made. He was specifically critical of the NBA for promoting Pride Month, and he actually described it as promoting unrighteousness. And in that sense, it's clear that he has an understanding of Scripture that says that people engaged in homosexual practice is not righteous. It's not the way that God had intended, and as a result, to celebrate that rather than to call it sin, rather than to call it immoral, rather than to call it unrighteous, is wrong. And so in that sense, I would agree with him in that particular thing 100%. And so that's again, he's making a particular moral argument against a particular practice. And again, I believe it is the clear teaching of Scripture that that homosexual activity, homosexual practice, is indeed not the way God has intended us to live as human beings. We find that in places where it speaks about our sexuality, that there definitely is an emphasis on it being right within the relationship, within the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman, and that sexual practices outside of marriage, including sexual practices between people of the same sex, are actually not the way that we as humans were intended to practice our sexuality. And so it, again, we find it pretty clear. Romans specifically, when people are engaged in those behaviors, he actually says he gives them over to a reprobate mind. And then as a result, the people can go on living as they do. It hurts. It's certainly an offense against God, and yet at the same time, he allows humans to engage in that behavior as they worship the creature rather than the Creator. And so that's the the emphasis, or the focus of that particular Instagram video that he put out. And so, of course, there was the response by the Bulls to release him. And again, like I said, I think it was a lot of virtue signaling. After all, he was just going to play out the rest of his contract over the next 2 weeks to the end of the season, and then he would have been a free agent anyway. And so I figure that they looked at it and said, hey, here's an opportunity for us to go ahead and release him. What's interesting is his response was, well, what exactly was my behavior that was detrimental to the team? That's one of those big catch-alls that could point to all kinds of different things. It could be that he was starting fights with people on his team. It could be that he was always late to all of his meetings. It could be that he was a particularly selfish player or anything, but was just posting that statement, calling something unrighteous, expression of his personal beliefs among the things that they said was conduct that was detrimental to the team. And so there have actually been some calls, even by other athletes, to say, hey, I'm interested in hearing what the Bulls say was the actual behavior that was detrimental to the team. And so anyway, so he said that he was released, essentially fired, and he believes for saying something, for standing up for a moral position against the NBA because of his faith. And a number of other athletes throughout the sporting world responded in support. So there have been a number of who have retweeted the news that he was released after having said this, with something that looks like support. The most clear of those was a player on the New England Patriots. He is the running back for the New England Patriots, and he posted he posted the Bible verse. So he went right ahead. Let's see if I think I have it. I think I have it pulled up. Let's see what he posted as a retweet, with a post, a retweet of the news that Ivy had been let go. He retweeted with the Bible verse from Matthew chapter 5, reading that blessed are those who were persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that's a pretty bold statement. Interestingly enough, this is also by another young player. So it is not, it is actually risky for that player to do that, for him to come out and essentially support Jaden Ivey in that way. And how do we know that it was risky? Well, because immediately after that happens, the head coach for the Patriots, Mike Vrabel, was asked specifically about that. So I read in an article from Yahoo Sports, it says, Vrabel was asked about Henderson's tweet on Tuesday. The coach said he wants players to be able to express themselves, but also make sure that they are educated. Here's his full comment. He said, I think there's a fine line. I want to tell you, I love Travion. I love the person. He cares deeply about our team. He cares deeply about his faith. He cares deeply about his family, his wife, the people in our building. And so I want them to be able to express what they believe in their heart and in their mind, but I also want to make sure that they're educated. We want to be inclusive. Everything we do is to provide an environment for people to want to feel comfortable, but also to share their personal beliefs. And then also we represent the team and we represent the organization. And so there's a few things there. It is probably the case from the position of the organization that they would prefer that this player didn't, Travion Henderson in this case, that these players don't express views that might otherwise mean that they have to talk about, is there some sort of discipline that we need to exercise in dealing with this player? I do think that it is likely the case in things that are more controversial, especially in areas of morality like this. It's interesting. the view of the view of sexuality that has been common in the Western world for the last 2,000 years and has been a part of the way that the Christian faith has taught for its entire existence, is now so controversial that, in fact, we would rather that the business would rather that they not say anything about it, even if they believe it. But then conversely, things that are against that, they're more than okay with those being openly celebrated because it shows that they are sufficiently progressive or cultured or whatever they may be. But anyway, so I think that part of the statement is probably fair. He wants them to be able to share their personal beliefs, but then also that we represent the team and we represent the organization. And again, I can actually understand that as an argument. We'd rather you not make those statements. But then, conversely, that player would rather those statements not be made on his behalf when the team makes those things as well. And so I think that it is completely fair for players to be like, no, that's like, you guys are promoting this. I'm going to respond by saying, hey, here's where I think that thing is wrong. Again, he seems to, he's like, hey, I know that this guy is a person of character. He cares about his family. He cares about the people that we work with. So he's actually trying to walk a fine line and not offend his player while at the same time not getting the press mad at him or the world mad at him. But I think that what's especially telling, but I also want to make sure that they're educated. What exactly do you mean by educated? Educated how? Educated to believe that whatever the new cultural belief on some sexual practice that has historically been called sinful can now, oh, well, hey, now it's acceptable? Like, no, what exactly is educated means that we must come to the conclusion that whatever the mores of the day are is what's right, and any beliefs held before that are wrong and are wrongly held and shouldn't be held. That you can't call unrighteousness. I mean, what exactly do these people want those who disagree with them to be educated in? Like what exactly is that? Like, he is actually holding the historical position that Christians have held forever. Like, that's the historical position of Christian faith. So he's not holding some idea or position that is outside of normal Christian belief. This is a standard Christian belief. What exactly do you want him to get educated on? It's completely ridiculous. I do believe that there's going to be more of these gotcha questions posed to all kinds of players. Anybody who might say something that is remotely in support of Jaden Ivey in particular, or just that perspective in general. And I think that is truly a sad state of affairs. Again, I don't watch basketball so that, or sports or anything, so that I hear what the particular political or theological or cultural ideas of the players are. I'm not necessarily against them being able to speak out on any of the things. Honestly, I don't really care what most of them think about any of those things, but I do, in a case like this, see that there's definitely a strange double standard. One of the things where we see that especially is there was I saw another article, and it was on the website Outkick, and the headline captures the idea. I won't go into it anymore, but it says, right or wrong, Jaden Ivey wasn't good enough to challenge the NBA's pride. And I think that that's a really interesting point. The reality is that there are a couple of other players in the NBA right now who have used anti-gay slurs in the recent past, with little to no real response from the NBA on that. But they're star players. They're star players. One of them is Anthony Edwards. The other is Kevin Durant. Those guys are superstar players. Kevin Durant, in fact, is one of the best players in the history of the NBA. Anthony Edwards is clearly one of the best players in the NBA now, and is many are trying to see how they can make him the face of the NBA. But they made statements that were at least as at least as offensive to the LGBTQ community as what Jaden Ivey said, and yet there was no discipline came down on them. And that's how you realize, or that's how you come to recognize that all of this stuff is performative, whether it's from the NBA, which again, we've already seen that. They didn't have an issue with the Magic City issue until the people, the fans started speaking out about it, and then they said, okay, hey, we need to cancel this thing. And then same thing here with the Bulls. The Bulls were like, oh, well, hey, this is a great place for us to do a little virtue signaling. And now there's this question, okay, well, is that really, is having a traditional view of sexuality and saying that out loud sufficient to be behavior that's detrimental to the team? That's a scary place for us to be. But it is not without real risk that these guys make these kinds of statements. It was not without risk that Luke Cornett wrote that blog and said, hey, I think we ought to think more highly of our women, and perhaps the NBA ought not think about supporting that. It was not without risk that Jaden Ivey said, hey, the NBA's pride initiatives are a celebration of unrighteousness, and I don't think that the NBA should be doing that. The reality is that as a player like he is, who averages 8 points a game, guess what? There are lots of people who are vying for spots in the NBA who would love to be able to have a shot at playing and scoring 8 points a game. So there's a part where, in the case of Jaden Ivey, he's relatively replaceable. It's a real risk to say the kinds of things that he did. And yet he did, because he felt a strong conviction about the fact that that was indeed something that shouldn't be happening. And so in that case, it was not without risk. Same for Travion Henderson. It's not like he's a superstar player. Now, he had a great season and seems like he's going to be even playing a bigger role on a team that has aspirations for the Super Bowl next year. And so it seems highly unlikely that any real penalty is going to come his way. But again, that kind of points out some of the same challenge that we're already talking about. I am happy to see Christians actually being bold enough to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. This is immoral, and we need to point it out as such. And doing it knowing that there may indeed be consequences. And so in that sense, I say kudos to those guys. I do want to close by reading from Matthew chapter 5, and not just verse 10, which is the verse that Travion Henderson quoted, but also verse 11. And here we have the Beatitudes, of course, and we're seeing all of these different things that are the character of those who are in Christ, essentially. But specifically, we come to verse 10, and we read, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's quite a promise. For those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 11, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And so for those who are speaking out against things that the immorality in our world, Jesus says that if you're receiving persecution because of that, Well, you're just as one who's in a long line of prophets who have also been under that same sort of persecution for speaking the truth to the people around them. And so in that sense, I want to commend these players for speaking out when they feel it's appropriate to speak out. And then for those who alongside them are supporting them and encouraging them as they do it. Again, it's not without risk that these things are done. As Christians continue to live in our world, there's going to be times when taking stands for righteousness are indeed things that we're going to have to do. And they're going to be things that can carry a real risk. Are we going to stand up and do it? Are we going to be the ones that say, no, this stops with me? I'm going to speak up and say when something is unrighteous, that it's unrighteous. When something is exploitative, that it's exploitative, and that we're not going to stand for it. Are we going to be the people who do that? If we do, we are blessed. We are the ones who will inherit the kingdom of heaven. And we will be just as those in a long line of prophets who have also suffered that kind of a fate. But I believe it is the case that God has called us to just that kind of behavior. So let's be a people who stand up, who speak the truth, who are bold about it, and but really at the same time do it in the right way. And so with that, we'll close. As always, we want to live not by lies, and we want to speak the truth in love.